The repair bay was quiet except for the slow ticking of old tools cooling on the workbench. Captain Jareth sat hunched over a broken control panel, his hands steady but slower than they used to be. His hair, once dark, was now silver, and a limp in his left leg made him move like a man twice his age. 15 years had passed since the war. 15 years since the crew had gone their separate ways. 15 years since he lost Lyra. The hum of the space station's generators was the only sound until a deep, echoing alarm cut through the air. The docking signal. Jareth frowned. No one was expected today. He wiped his hands on a rag and limped toward the hangar doors. The sound of approaching engines rumbled through the floor, steady, controlled, and oddly familiar. A sleek ship slid into the docking bay, its hull scarred from battle, its markings half burned away. The engines powered down with a low hiss, and steam swirled across the floor. Jareth's chest tightened. That ship, he had heard it before in another lifetime. The ramp lowered slowly, each mechanical groan echoing in the wide bay. For a moment, there was nothing, just the cold air spilling from the ship. Then a figure stepped out, tall, armor glinting faintly under the dim lights. The silver blue of her skin caught the glow, and her eyes locked on him with a focus so sharp it was like a blade. Jareth froze. His heart slammed against his ribs. It couldn't be her. She was gone. He had seen the explosion. He had mourned her. The figure stopped a few steps away, then went down on one knee. Her right fist pressed over her chest in a sharp, practiced motion. Her voice trembled, but the words came out clear. After 15 years apart, Captain, it's my honor to serve you again. The rag slipped from his fingers and fell to the floor. He stared at her, unable to speak. She looked older, her face lined with small scars, but it was her, Lyra, his second in command, the alien warrior who had once saved his life more times than he could count. You? His voice cracked. How? She rose slowly, her gaze never leaving his. I survived, Captain, but there are things you must know, things that never ended. She reached to her side and pulled out a small black case. It was military issue, sealed with a code lock and stamped with the words top secret, eyes only. She handed it to him with both hands, as if it weighed far more than it should. What's inside? He asked, his voice low. A future you thought we'd never face again, she said. Her eyes flickered with something between fear and urgency. Jareth hesitated, then opened the case. A small silver data chip rested inside. The moment he touched it, a holographic projection burst into life above it. Lines of coordinates, star maps, and an image that made his stomach turn. A massive weapon, larger than any battleship, its dark frame bristling with gun arrays and a long cannon barrel aimed toward an unknown target. This was supposed to be destroyed, he muttered. Lyra stepped closer. It wasn't, and now it's nearly complete. He looked up at her, searching for the truth in her face. Where did you get this? Her jaw tightened. 15 years, Captain. 15 years in the hands of those who built it. I was taken after our last battle. Prisoner. They made me work in their mines, made me repair their machines. I waited for a chance to escape. When I did, I took this. Jareth felt a cold weight settle in his chest. And why come to me? Why now? Because, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, their first target is Earth. The words hung in the air like smoke. Jareth's mind raced. No one would believe her without proof, and even if they did, the official fleets wouldn't mobilize in time. The politics, the bureaucracy, it would take months. They had weeks, maybe less. He looked at her again. Her armor was scratched, her eyes tired, but she stood straight, unshaken, ready. For 15 years he had thought of himself as a relic, a man the galaxy had already forgotten. But now, standing in front of him was the one soldier who had never abandoned him, not in spirit, not even in captivity. Jareth closed the case and slid the chip into his pocket. If what you're saying is true, we can't go to command. They'll slow us down, bury this under meetings and protocols. Then we go alone, she said without hesitation. He almost laughed. 2 people against a fleet? Her lips curved slightly. 2 people against the galaxy, just like old times. For the first time in years, something sparked in Jareth's chest. He didn't know if it was hope, fear, or the dangerous thrill of battle calling to him again. But one thing was certain. Whatever this was, it was only the beginning. Outside the hangar's wide windows, the stars stretched endlessly, silent witnesses to the reunion of 2 soldiers who had once changed the course of a war. Somewhere in that darkness, the weapon waited. Jareth turned back to her, his voice firm. All right, Lyra, let's find the rest of the crew. Her salute was sharp, and in her eyes he saw the same fire that had kept her alive for 15 long years. Lyra stood beside the workbench while Jareth inserted the chip into an old holoprojector. The device whirred to life, throwing flickering blue light across the room. Star maps unfolded in the air, shifting through layers until a sector deep beyond known patrol routes appeared. At the center was the weapon, larger now than the small preview he had seen before. Its frame stretched almost the length of a small moon, and the dark metal gleamed as if freshly built. Around it, dozens of escort ships drifted in slow, silent formation. This, Lyra said quietly, is called the Eclipse Cannon. Jareth frowned at the name. I've heard of prototypes, thought they were abandoned after the war. They weren't abandoned, Lyra replied. They were hidden. I was taken to a mining colony the day you thought I died. It wasn't an accident, Captain. They wanted skilled prisoners. They kept me alive because I could fix what their engineers couldn't. Her voice was calm, but the faint tremor in her hands betrayed the memories. Jareth studied her face. There was no need to ask what she had endured. The years had carved the truth into her eyes. How did you escape? He asked. Lyra's gaze dropped for a moment. I worked for years under their guards. No sunlight, no sky, just stone walls and the sound of drills. But I listened. I heard them talk about the weapon. I learned its schedule, its vulnerabilities. When they moved me to the shipyard for repairs, I saw it with my own eyes. The Eclipse cannon is weeks away from firing. First target, Earth. After that, every planet in the Alliance. The room seemed to grow colder. Jareth remembered the last war, worlds burning, fleets torn apart. The thought of another one was a weight in his chest. If you had proof, he said slowly, why didn't you go to the High Command? I did, she said bitterly. Or tried. The moment I transmitted anything, they jammed the signal and traced my location. I barely escaped. Whoever is behind this, they have agents in every council and fleet. Jareth exhaled sharply. Which means if we tell anyone now, they'll either ignore us or kill us before we get close. Exactly, Lyra said. She stepped closer, her voice firm. We can't wait for permission. We have to act before they finish fueling the weapon. He looked back at the hologram. The Eclipse cannon rotated slowly, its central barrel glowing with faint red energy. The image of destruction was so real he could almost hear the charge building. And we're supposed to stop that? Just you and me? Jareth asked, half a challenge. We've done more with less, Lyra replied without hesitation. He couldn't deny it. There was a time when they'd taken down enemy destroyers with nothing but a half-armed freighter and a bad plan. But back then, he was younger, faster, uninjured. Now his leg ached just from standing too long. As if sensing his doubt, Lyra crossed her arms. We'll need a crew, people we can trust, people who won't ask too many questions until it's over. Names flashed through his mind. Smugglers, mercenaries, retired soldiers who owed him favors. It wouldn't be easy. Most of them had built new lives far from war, but if they knew what was at stake, some might return. And a ship, he added. Something with teeth, not this old station crate. I know where to find one, Lyra said. It's hidden in the scrap fields of Orden Prime. Belonged to a commander who didn't survive the last battle. She wouldn't want it rusting there. The plan was dangerous already, but it was the only chance. Jareth turned off the projector and pocketed the chip. First, we get the ship, then the crew. After that, we find the Eclipse cannon and end this before it fires. Lyra gave a sharp nod, but her eyes softened as she looked at him. I never stopped hoping I'd fight beside you again. Jareth didn't reply. He simply moved to the hangar controls, limping as he walked. The sound of the docking clamps releasing filled the air, followed by the low hum of engines coming to life. They set a course for Orden Prime, the station fading behind them. Stars streaked by in the viewport, and for a long while neither of them spoke. But the silence wasn't empty. It was the heavy quiet before a storm. Halfway through the jump, Lyra broke it. There's one more thing I didn't tell you. Jareth glanced at her. Go on. They're hunting me, she said. The moment I escaped, they put a price on my head, big enough to turn friends into enemies. That bounty's probably on you now, too. He let out a short laugh. Good, makes things simpler. Now we know who's coming. Her lips twitched in a faint smile. You haven't changed. And you haven't forgotten how dangerous this life is, he he said. Stay close, Lyra. We're not just fighting a weapon, we're fighting a shadow that's been moving in the dark for 15 years. Outside, space stretched on forever, cold and endless. Somewhere far ahead, in a sector no one dared to patrol, the Eclipse cannon waited, and time was running out. The warship graveyard of Orden Prime stretched across space like a rusted ocean, broken hulls and twisted metal floating in the dim light of a dying sun. Jareth's ship moved slowly through the field, weaving between debris that drifted lazily but could crush them if struck. Lyra sat in the pilot's seat, eyes fixed ahead, hands steady on the controls. Somewhere in here, she said, there's a ship called the Iron Talon. Fast, shielded, and fitted with pulse cannons. If it's still in one piece, we can make her fly again. Jareth scanned the wrecks outside. Old frigates, stripped cruisers, and silent escape pods floated past. His leg ached from the long hours standing beside her, but he didn't complain. The silence was heavy, not just from the graveyard's emptiness, but from the memories. Many of these ships had once flown under his command. After an hour of searching, Lyra spotted it, a dark silhouette half buried in the shadow of a shattered carrier. The Iron Talon was larger than Jareth remembered, its hull scarred but intact. Bring us in, he said. They docked through a side hatch. Inside, the air was stale and cold, but the corridors were surprisingly clean. Their footsteps echoed as they moved toward the command deck. The walls bore burn marks from old battles, and the smell of machine oil lingered in the air. Lyra checked the consoles, main systems offline, engines in standby, weapons dormant but functional. Jareth's fingers brushed the captain's chair. She'll do. They worked in silence, bringing the ship back to life. Lyra crawled through maintenance shafts, reconnecting power lines, while Jareth restarted the reactor. Lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the deck. Hours later, the Iron Talon shuddered as her engines roared back to life for the first time in 15 years. The moment was cut short by a sharp alarm. Incoming, Lyra said, checking the scanners. 3 small ships, moving fast. Bounty hunters, Jareth guessed. They're here for us. The hunters closed in, their ships sleek and armed with rapid-fire cannons. Lyra slammed the throttle and the Iron Talon burst forward, weaving through the wreckage. Power to shields, Jareth barked. Bolts of energy lit up the darkness, glancing off their shields but shaking the deck. Lyra spun the ship hard left, skimming the hull of an old destroyer to avoid a missile. Jareth manned the gunnery console, returning fire with precise bursts. One hunter went up in flames, crashing into a drifting cruiser. The second clipped a piece of debris and spun out, but the third stayed on their tail. He's locking weapons, Lyra shouted. Not for long, Jareth muttered, swiveling the turret. He fired a pulse round that ripped through the hunter's shield and tore its hull apart. The wreck exploded into a cloud of glowing fragments. Silence returned. Breathing hard, Lyra slowed the Iron Talon and set a course away from Orden Prime. Whoever's building that weapon, Jareth said, they already know we're coming. Then we'll have to be faster, Lyra replied. Jareth sat back in the captain's chair, feeling the ship hum beneath him. It wasn't just a vessel, it was a promise. With the Iron Talon, they had teeth again. Now they just needed the crew to bite with them. Lyra glanced at him. Who's first on your list? He smiled faintly. An old thief who owes me more than he can count. They jumped to hyperspace, the wreckage of Orden Prime fading into the distance, and the hunt for their allies began. The Iron Talon dropped out of hyperspace near the edge of a dense asteroid belt, its hull still bearing scorch marks from the last fight. Jareth leaned forward in the captain's chair, scanning the navigation display. Somewhere in this belt was their first real lead to the Eclipse cannon's location. A former smuggler named Varric, who had eyes in every illegal shipping lane in the sector. Signals are scrambled here, Lyra said from the co-pilot's seat, fingers moving over the console. Makes it harder for patrols to track and easier for an ambush. That's why we're going in quiet, Jareth replied. We find Varric, get what we need, and leave before anyone knows we were here. They threaded through the belt, using the asteroids as cover. Massive rocks drifted lazily, their surfaces jagged with craters from centuries of impacts. The ship's sensors caught faint heat signatures, hidden engines buried deep within some of the larger ones. That's him, Lyra said, pointing to a cluster of asteroids ahead. A faint beacon blinked twice before vanishing. Jareth angled the iron talon toward the signal. As they approached, one of the asteroids split open, revealing a hidden hangar. Docking lights guided them inside, where the bay doors sealed shut behind them. A tall, thin man with a half-metal faceplate stood waiting, a long coat brushing the floor as he walked forward. "Jareth," Varric said with a smirk, "I thought you were dead." "Not yet," Jareth replied, stepping down the ramp. "We need information." Varric's eyes flicked to Lyra, and his smile faded slightly. "And I see you brought a ghost with you." "She's real enough," Jareth said sharply. "And so is the problem we're here about. We need to know where the Eclipse cannon is being built." At the mention of the weapon, Varric's expression changed. He gestured for them to follow, leading them through narrow steel corridors into a control room filled with old monitors and comm arrays. "You're not the first to ask," Varric said, leaning against a console, "but you might be the first who actually plans to do something about it. The cannon's in a dead sector. No patrols, no shipping lanes. The only way in is through the Graven Rift, and no sane pilot flies there." "We're not here for sane," Jareth replied. Varric studied him for a long moment, then keyed a code into the console. A grainy star map appeared, showing a jagged tear in space, black clouds twisting around it like a living thing. "The rift changes every cycle. Get the timing wrong, and you'll be crushed by gravity storms or ripped apart by debris." Lyra stepped forward. "We'll need the exact cycle data, and we'll need it fast." Varric tapped a few more keys, but the map froze halfway through the download. A warning light flashed on the wall. "They followed you," he said grimly. "Bounty hunters. 4 ships." The hidden hangar shook as explosions echoed outside. Jareth drew his sidearm. "Get us the data, Varric. Lyra, warm up the engines." Lyra was already running. In minutes, the Iron Talon roared back to life, its systems pushing into combat readiness. Jareth covered the ramp, exchanging fire with enemy boarders who poured through the outer doors. Varric finished the download, tossing a data drive to Jareth. "That's everything I've got," Varric said. "Now get out before they blast this whole rock apart." Jareth sprinted up the ramp, Lyra sealing the hatch as the first missile hit the hangar walls. The Iron Talon shot forward, weaving through the asteroids while enemy ships gave chase. "4 on our tail," Lyra said, hands steady on the controls. "Too fast, too heavy." "Let the heavies follow," Jareth ordered. "We take out the fast ones first." The Iron Talon darted between asteroids, using their cover to break missile locks. Jareth's gunnery fire shredded the first pursuer in a burst of flame. The second clipped an asteroid's edge and spun out, drifting helplessly. The 2 heavier ships kept coming, their cannons hammering the shields. Lyra dove into a dense cluster, skimming dangerously close to the rocks. One of the enemy ships miscalculated and slammed into an asteroid, vanishing in a flash. The last hunter pulled away, unwilling to follow them deeper. Breathing hard, Jareth slumped back into the chair. Lyra checked the systems, shields battered but still holding. Jareth pulled the data drive from his pocket and looked at it. Somewhere in its files was the exact path to the Eclipse cannon. But the chase had proven one thing. They were being hunted at every step. "They know where we're going now," Lyra said quietly. Jareth nodded. "Then we move faster. Next stop, assemble the rest of the crew, because when we reach that weapon, we're going to need every gun we can get." The Iron Talon slid out of hyperspace near the rim of a barren moon, its surface lit only by the pale glow of a nearby gas giant. Jareth had chosen this place for one reason, because Rin Kale, a retired demolition expert and one of the most unpredictable people he knew, liked to hide where no one would bother her. Lyra kept her eyes on the scanners. "I'm picking up faint heat signatures in the crater field. Could be a camp or a trap." "With Rin, it's usually both," Jareth said, tightening his grip on the armrest. "Let's keep the guns ready." They set the ship down between 2 jagged ridges of rock. Dust swirled in the thin atmosphere as Jareth and Lyra stepped onto the surface, wearing light breathers against the cold air. Ahead, a cluster of metal shelters stood half buried in the moon's soil, their edges scorched from old explosions. The moment they approached, a voice crackled over a hidden speaker. "Step any closer and I'll redecorate this moon with your limbs." Jareth smiled faintly. "Hello to you too, Rin." A metal hatch hissed open, and out stepped a broad-shouldered woman in a patched exosuit, her red hair wild and her hands resting casually on a pair of explosive charges strapped to her belt. She looked at Jareth, then at Lyra, her eyes narrowing. You brought her, Rin said flatly. She's the reason we're here, Jareth replied. We need your skills again. Rin laughed without humor. Last time you said that, I ended up blowing up a warship while running barefoot through a reactor room. And you survived, Jareth said, which is exactly why we need you now. Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady. The Eclipse cannon. It's real, and it's weeks away from firing on Earth. Rin's expression hardened at the name. She looked from one to the other, then back at her camp. Come inside. Inside the largest shelter, maps and schematics covered the walls, with crates of explosives stacked in one corner. Rin poured herself a drink and listened as Lyra laid out everything, the secret construction, the weapons capabilities, and the Graven Rift's shifting dangers. When Lyra finished, Rin sat back, tapping her fingers against the table. You're both insane. That thing's going to be guarded like a nest of angry hornets, and you're telling me you want to sneak in and destroy it? Not sneak in, Jareth said. Fight our way in, plant charges, and make sure it can never fire. Rin was silent for a moment, then a slow grin spread across her face. You're lucky I get bored easily. They spent the next hours going over potential infiltration points. Rin pointed out flaws in their plan, then offered better ones, more dangerous, but more effective. She had contacts who could supply specialized charges that would burn through the cannon's armor from the inside out. Before they could finalize anything, the ground shook violently. Dust cascaded from the ceiling as an alarm blared. Lyra ran to the scanner, mounted near the door. 2 dropships ups, incoming. No markings, but they're armed. Bounty hunters again, Jareth muttered. Rin grabbed her explosives, then let's give them a warm welcome. They moved fast, setting traps along the ridges outside. As the dropships descended, the first mine went off, tearing one of them apart midair. The second landed hard, its side hatch opening to spill armed figures into the dust. Jareth fired from cover, picking them off one by one, while Rin's charges sent shockwaves through the rocky terrain. Lyra darted between positions, her aim precise, never wasting a shot. Within minutes, the surviving hunters retreated to their damaged ship, blasting off in a trail of smoke. The silence that followed was sharp and tense. Rin dusted off her gloves. Well, that was fun. When do we leave? Jareth looked at her and smiled. Now. They gathered Rin's gear, loaded it onto the Iron Talon, and launched back into space. 3 of them now, bound by the same mission, heading for the next name on Jareth's list. Somewhere out there, more allies waited, but so did the people determined to stop them. Lyra stood at the viewport, watching the stars slide past. Rin joined her, smirking. So, Ghost Girl, you really think we can pull this off? Lyra didn't look away from the stars. We have to. And in that small, quiet moment, both of them knew there was no turning back. The Iron Talon emerged from hyperspace into the cold silence of the outer rim, its hull gleaming faintly under the light of a distant star. Jareth sat forward in the captain's chair, studying the coordinates on the screen. This was their last recruitment stop before heading to the Graven Rift, and the one he both needed and dreaded most, because this time the name on his list belonged who had sworn never to fight again. Lyra adjusted the controls, guiding the ship toward a shadowed planet wrapped in thick gray clouds. You're sure he'll help? No, Jareth admitted. But if he says yes, we'll have a pilot who can fly through a hurricane blindfolded. The planet below was hostile, violent storms tearing across the surface, lightning crackling through the clouds like the veins of a living creature. Their destination was an isolated outpost built into the side of a canyon, shielded from the worst of the winds. They landed on a narrow platform. Waiting there was a broad, weathered man with dark skin, his eyes hidden behind polarized goggles. His arms were crossed, and his expression was unreadable. Captain, he said simply. Jareth nodded. Kale. Kale glanced at Lyra and Rin, then back to Jareth. I heard you were chasing ghosts. I didn't think one of them would be standing next to you. Lyra gave a faint smile but didn't answer. Inside Kale's quarters, the air smelled faintly of engine grease and rain. Jareth wasted no time. We're going after the Eclipse cannon. We need a pilot who can get us through the rift alive. Kale laughed once, shaking his head. You're out of your mind. The rift eats ships for breakfast, and you think I'm just going to sign up for a suicide run? This isn't about us, Lyra said sharply. If that weapon fires, Earth is gone. then the rest of the Alliance. Kale studied her, then looked at Jareth. You really think you can stop it? Jareth's voice was steady. I don't think. I know, but I can't do it without you. For a long moment, Kale said nothing. Then he moved to a locker and pulled out a flight jacket, worn and patched from years of use. If I die, I'm haunting you, Captain. They shook hands, the deal sealed without another word. The moment they stepped back onto the landing platform, the air lit up with weapons fire. A sleek black ship swooped low over the canyon, its cannons spitting red energy bolts. Rin dove for cover while Lyra returned fire with her rifle. Bounty hunters again, Rin shouted. Kale ran to a smaller craft parked at the edge of the platform. Get on board. I'll get us to the Iron Talon before they fry us. The small shuttle screamed out of the canyon, weaving through violent gusts and forked lightning strikes. The hunter ship pursued, matching every twist and turn. Kale pushed the shuttle into a narrow storm tunnel between two mountain ridges, rain slamming against the canopy. They're still on us, Lyra called out. Kale grinned. Not for long. He rolled the shuttle onto its side, skimming dangerously close to the canyon wall. The pursuing ship tried to follow, but clipped its wing on the rock face and spun out in a burst of flame. Minutes later, they docked with the Iron Talon, all four of them sprinting up the ramp. Jareth wasted no time ordering the ship into hyperspace, the stars stretching into lines as they escaped the planet's pull. In the quiet that followed, Kale dropped into the pilot's seat and ran a hand over the controls. I'll get you through the rift, he said. But after that, Captain, it's all on you. Jareth nodded. After that, we finish this. Lyra glanced at each of them in turn, the crew now complete. They had a warship, they had the people, and they had the map to the weapon. All that remained was the most dangerous part of the journey, the final approach through the Graven Rift. The Iron Talon drifted at the edge of the Graven Rift, the black clouds ahead twisting and folding in ways that hurt the eyes. Lightning pulsed deep within, flashes of blue and green illuminating jagged fragments of rock tumbling endlessly in the void. The crew stood on the bridge, each one silent, knowing this was the last stretch before they reached the Eclipse cannon. Kale's hands gripped the controls. Once we enter, there's no turning back. The rift moves on a pattern, but it's alive in its own way. If I get it wrong by even a few seconds, we'll be scrap metal before we see daylight again. Then don't get it wrong, Rin muttered, checking the explosive strapped across her chest. Jareth's gaze was fixed on the swirling darkness ahead. Everyone to stations. Once we're through, the fight begins immediately. Lyra, you're with me on the strike team. Kale, you get us in close and keep the ship alive. Rin, make sure those charges stay armed. Kale guided the Iron Talon forward. The moment they crossed the threshold, gravity slammed into them, pulling the ship in erratic directions. Alarms blared as rocks the size of towers hurtled past, some spinning so close they scraped the shields. Lightning flashed, blinding white across the viewport, and the rift's strange winds pushed the ship sideways. Kale's voice was calm but tight. Hold on. He spun the ship through a narrow opening between two massive shards of debris, the hull brushing so close that sparks lit the outer cameras. Minutes stretched like hours until finally they burst out of the rift, and there it was. The Eclipse cannon loomed ahead, anchored to a massive station bristling with weapons. The cannon's barrel glowed with a deep red light, energy building for its first shot. Jareth didn't hesitate. Kale, bring us in. Lyra, Rin, time to move. The Iron Talon dived toward the station, weaving through enemy fire. Kale's sharp maneuvers kept them alive as Jareth led the strike team through the docking hatch and into the station's metal corridors. The fight was immediate. Enemy soldiers poured from side passages, blaster fire lighting the shadows. Lyra moved with precision, her shots dropping enemies before they could react. Rin planted charges on key support beams as they advanced. They reached the power core chamber, a massive sphere pulsing with energy. Rin knelt by the base, setting the last of the explosives. Once this goes, the whole cannon will collapse on itself. A blast rocked the room. Smoke and sparks filled the air as enemy reinforcements swarmed in. Jareth and Lyra fought side by side, pushing them back, but more kept coming. A shot grazed Jareth's arm, and Lyra stepped in front of him, taking a hit to her armor but refusing to slow. The timer on Rin's detonator blinked red. We've got 60 seconds. We need to move now. They fought their way back through the corridors, the timer ticking down. Over comms, Kale's voice was urgent. "You've got incoming fighters swarming the Iron Talon. I can hold them off for maybe 30 seconds. Then we'll be there in 20, Jareth said through clenched teeth. They burst out of the docking tunnel just as Kale swung the ship into position. The ramp sealed behind them, and Kale punched the engines, pulling away from the station as fast as the battered ship could fly. In the distance, the explosives went off. The power core erupted in a blinding flash, the shockwave tearing through the station. The Eclipse cannon's barrel split apart, chunks of molten metal spinning into the void. The entire structure collapsed, vanishing in a silent bloom of fire and debris. The crew stood on the bridge, watching in silence. Lyra's gaze met Jareth's, and she gave a small nod. "It's done." Jareth exhaled slowly. "It's done. For now." As the Iron Talon turned toward the long road home, the stars beyond the rift seemed a little brighter, though each of them knew this victory would not be the last fight they faced. But for the first time in 15 years, Jareth felt the weight of the past ease, because the soldier who had once been lost had stood beside him again until the end.